Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I am your host, Scott, and this is my co-host, Caleb. Caleb, how are you this evening?
Doing wonderful.
Excellent. I'm glad to see you. I'm glad you're back. And we are here to talk about, of course, the experiences growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has helped shape our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today, and also discuss current cultural topics through the lens of somebody who grew up during that era. Now, Caleb, our guest today is somebody that you weren't entirely in youth group with, but I certainly was. Who were we talking to?
We're talking with Brant, and yes, I was barely in youth group with Brant because I think he came to Five Oaks I would think my senior year, I want to say, but maybe not. I don't know.
But we also found out that along with your parents, his parents were founding members of the church, which we did not know.
And my parents weren't founding members, but his parents were. Yes. They were at the church. Five Oaks at one point met in a roller rink, and they had nicknamed themselves the Holy Rollers. And him and his family were going to the church at that time. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he even kind of predates, he's as close to as OG as we're going to get, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get much more than that. I mean, founding members of the church, and then moved away for a little while and came back and kind of all over. I mean, a real journey.
So what I remember from his time with us, and I can say this with some confidence, I was very much involved in junior high youth group, meaning that when I was in high school, like a junior and a senior, at the very least, if not longer, I was essentially doing the youth pastor's job of leading junior high youth group.
Right.
Right. And so, I'd put together the lessons and teach the lessons and all that kind of stuff. Brant was a kid who came up along with some of his friends who we talk about in this interview through junior high youth group. And I was like, this kid is nuts. He was like, and you know why he's nuts? It's because he's a really smart dude. And so like, he comes across as really sharp. He's been very successful because of it. And, a lot of times we don't realize it, but when kids at that age, if they're super sharp, they might get bored pretty easily. And I think he was just finding ways to keep everyone entertained and laughing. And he certainly did that while pushing the envelope a little bit. So I was excited to talk to him because we were kind of able to walk through some of that and see, hey, how are things now, and how did that experience of being crazy as a kid in youth group shape who we are today?
I mean, I think he even just talked about some of that kind of finding his footing socially is how I would put it. Like just being, the way he processes things. I cannot relate to that because I was not I'm not intelligent. And so,
you just stumbled even saying
that.
Yeah.
I was going to say something like I was the least intelligent person in the room, but I was like, it doesn't really work. But yeah, so I think he talked about that a little, just kind of that finding himself socially and kind of just figuring out where he fits in and how he relates to people and those sorts of things. So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, no, it was a great conversation, and really inquisitive, really sort of a lens through which we don't see very often, which is like, you were a little bit the generation after us, and you can even tell things for him and his experience shifted slightly compared to what we did. So yeah, I really enjoyed talking to him. Brant, if you're listening, thank you for jumping on. We really appreciate it. And for everyone else listening as well, we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
Brant, how you doing this evening? It's great to see you.
Good to see you guys too. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Yes, you're welcome. It's great to talk to you again. It's been multiple years, probably decades.
Yeah, a
So,
couple decades. You and I exchange some messages every once in a while over whatever social medias we're on every once in a while. So we've been in
the
touch a
social
little bit.
medias. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it. Well, we always like to start off and give our audience a little bit of a background. Like, tell us how you came to be a part of Five Oaks Youth Group, how that kind of played a role in your junior high school experience.
Okay, so my situation was growing up. I moved around quite a bit. My dad, he wasn't in the military or anything, but we moved around a lot of states. We actually lived in Woodbury, where Five Oaks is, briefly in the early '90s, and I think my folks were like involved in founding the church at that point. They were meeting in the roller rink, and it was a very kind of like very like cutting edge church planty type deal, right? So we moved away, went to New York, went to Texas, and then in ninth grade I moved back up from Texas, and so I would have been still middle school. Ninth grade was middle school at that time,
Mm-hmm.
the last year, and so we kind of went around church shopping, and my folks said, well, let's see what Five Oaks is, if it's still the same, if we still like it there. And my folks asked us if we liked the vibe there, and if that's kind of where we wanted to make our church home. And so everyone said, yeah, we did. I've got two younger sisters,
Mm-hmm.
and so we decided to make that our home. And I guess just part of that was going to youth group and getting involved in that programming. And so I mean, it's just kind of a very natural thing. We're attending there. You go to the youth
Mm-hmm.
group where you attend, right? So
That's how they want to get you connected. Yeah, sure.
yeah. So no great like mystery there. You've probably talked to some other folks that have maybe weren't in a church, or maybe your folks weren't churched, and then they sought out
Mm-hmm.
the youth group. But that's not my story. But there were certainly a lot of folks that kind of fit into that mold.
It's fascinating. I didn't know that your parents were kind of part of the founding group. I just thought you guys showed up out of the blue. Like, hey, we're part of it too. That's really cool. I mean, roller rink. That was Caleb's time. That was before my
No, no,
time.
no.
Oh.
That was not. That's pre-Caleb, too. I was going to
Ooh.
the Christian Missionary Alliance Church at that time.
Okay.
So I forgot about the roller rink. But yeah, that was
Yeah.
when we started going, we were already at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So
And then was the Christian Alliance Church like kind of a church plant thing, or like what was the vibe there that kind of transposed into that?
I mean, the Christian Missionary Alliance Church was just there, and they hired a pastor, and the original pastor left. They hired a pastor, and within 3 months, his wife was like, "I can't stand living here. We're out of here." And so he quit. And he quit. They had just
Okay.
bought the property that Five Oaks is on now,
Oh, really?
and a bunch of us, like the church, basically imploded. And the way they did, they basically gifted that property to Five Oaks.
See, I didn't know that part of
And
the
kind
story.
of everybody kind of joined Five Oaks and gave them the property. My dad's name was on the property.
I
And he was,
remember
like,
seeing
really
the deed.
worried.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, I don't know how this is going to work. I own this property and I don't have the capital for it, because his name was kind of attached to it.
They had an anniversary thing a few years back. It was some milestone, 30 years or something like that. And so they had a lot of kind of archival stuff coming out, and they had some of the stuff with the land and everything. And you mentioned Ben's parents, and actually, you guys may not know this, but where I am right now, like we bought their house.
Oh, okay.
So
Get outta here.
So I actually,
Bonkers, dude.
yeah. So that's where I'm living. So yeah, I mean, if their names, if my folks' names were on the chart, it was pretty early on. I mean, I have a memory of meeting in the arcade of that roller rink.
Wow.
At the erstwhile Wooddale Fun Zone, because that's no more. So yeah, I mean that was a very kind of like interesting thing. And the reason I asked that follow up question to you, Caleb, is just that like it's kind of a weird configuration, right? Like you're joining this church that doesn't have a building. You're meeting in borrowed space. You own this weird plot of land with farmhouses and sheds and barns and stuff. For me, that was a lot of fun. Like
Yeah.
it's not your typical setup. Like what they have today. It's not conventional, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
you're meeting in this farmhouse. They got the offices upstairs. They've got this land that's like you can go out, and at that time there wasn't a lot around there. You could go out and shoot your BB guns and
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
go off roading and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Back in the good old days.
Back in the good old days.
Now it's all formal and boring.
Yeah, well, once the farmer chased us off, we were driving through his fields. He didn't take kindly to that.
I have to say that I do have distinct memories of being your junior high youth group leader and just try and corral those kids in that farmhouse or that barn farm area. It was just a madness. It was a perfect play space for kids.
Yeah, it was great, but I mean, like atypical, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
and I think that contributed a lot to kind of the ethos that we had in that environment, right? Just very, very kind of ad hoc, right? Maybe less formal. We had a smaller, more tight knit group than I think what we have now. I mentioned I can't remember if this got recorded or not, but I dropped my daughter off at the Five Oaks Youth Group tonight, right?
Yeah.
And they got middle school, they got high school, and there's 100 and some kids in each one, and they've got this huge apparatus and two youth pastors and then a number of ancillary staff, and I mean they do a remarkable job. It's not better or worse. It's just different from I think what we experienced, right?
It's natural growth at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you said you dropped your daughter off there today, which is pretty cool. Have you been involved in Five Oaks after graduating otherwise?
Yes. So after high school, I went to college at Purdue in Indiana, and graduated from there. Got married, lived down there for 8 years after graduating. Had a couple jobs, and then I moved back up here to take a different job. Moved my family up, and we made Five Oaks our home once again. And so that's we're members there. I serve on the worship team. I play bass and drums and mandolin,
Nice.
and run front of house audio and do all kinds of stuff. So
That's fascinating. You're, I don't know, one of the first-ish interviews we've had, four or five now, and of those, let's say three of them still work there or volunteer in some capacity. No, wait, Alex did. No, he's gone, kind of thing. But there was a lot of involvement, it seems, with more people than Caleb and I realize post high school graduation. Whereas, I mean, I helped out somewhat. I think you and I were on a Mexico trip together when I was in college. Caleb just got out of there, and so it's neat to see everyone kind of being drawn back, and maybe that speaks to that experience we had with the group in high school.
I think it does. I think it also speaks to having a healthy culture. At least that's how I see it. Maybe other people's mileage may have varied. Maybe other people had bad experiences or had something that drove them away or did not attract them back. Whatever it might be. But I mean, certainly not. That certainly wasn't my experience, right? I mean, I felt like I'm very comfortable kind of with the theological positions, with the type of worship that takes place there, with the engagement and just the overall culture. I feel is healthy. No place, nothing's without its problems, right? You always got stuff that goes on, right? But overall, I think they've avoided a lot of the big pitfalls that a lot of these big churches make the news.
And that, at some point, that doesn't describe me based on the leaders that are still there. If I go on the website, I'm like, oh, that person's still there, which is great. And that's not totally common either, is for someone, especially volunteer, like not head pastor, but people below head pastor, to stay at those places for consistently for a couple of decades, right? So 3 maybe. I remember when Henry was hired, that was in the farmhouse, and that was
right.
That was at least 25 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of transient. There's a transient nature to staffing a church. It seems. I mean, just from my experience, churches in Indiana and here and everything. I mean, especially certain ministries seem very prone to that. Worship ministry seems very like music ministry is very prone to like a lot of turnover. And I'm friends with the guy they got now, and he's been there for a while and has built up a nice apparatus as well. And I think they do a good job empowering people and coaching them in some of the leadership strategies that are necessary there. And Henry Michael took over the youth group there, and so something that I wanted to kind of talk about is just like when you're younger, when you're in high school and middle school, like the age gap, like so Caleb, and actually you too, Scott, like the age gap between like me, you guys are what, 43, I'm 41, so we're like 2 years, you guys graduated a couple years ahead of me or whatever.
43. Thank you.
You might be a touch older, maybe.
A touch older.
58.
Yeah, but a handful.
58, sorry.
But a couple 3 years at that time is it's an intimidating gap, right? And that's the gap. The gap between me and Henry Michael is about like 4 years, right? And so for me, it's edifying to see Henry Michael, someone that was always kind of maybe looking up to me, maybe the same way I kind of looked up to you guys coming in as the older kind of cohort, really excelling and flourishing in a leadership capacity. And it's something I've seen in my career too, right? You go back to old places you used to work, and you see people that you mentored and maybe brought into the company and trained and so forth, and then you go back and they're just killing it,
Yeah.
And that's not exactly the same thing, but it's that same kind of deal where like now 25 years later, like that age gap is a lot less, and it's something that you have to. It's kind of getting used to. I talk all the time about how old I'm getting. I guess
that's what old people do, dude. It's like, man, I'm old.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how old we are. So
yeah.
and that's the kids hate it.
The kids
they all hate it. No, I agree with you. Like it's pretty, and especially in this situation, right? Again, maybe other people's experience is different, given that our church still is that same building that they've used faithfully for a long time. For those people who don't know, the guy who's the youth pastor now is the son of the head pastor, right? And he's like, it wasn't necessarily supposed to be that way, it just ended up that way, right? There was never any expectation there. So you talked a lot about kind of that culture of the youth group being stable and a place where, it kind of brought up leaders and stuff like that. What are some things that resonate with you most about your 90s youth group experience there? Like, what are the things you still remember and hold on to?
I think that we had this small group, right? And I feel like we were really pretty tight knit. You're maybe looking at 15 people or so, enough people to fit in a living room and have a conversation. And for me, one of the things, moving around a lot and then coming back to a place, I'll just be frank, I didn't fit in really well socially in Texas. And then when I came up here, you're in the middle of like ninth grade, which is just this like awkward time anyway, right? And Minnesota can have a reputation of being a little bit cliquey. It was nothing like Texas, but small town Texas has its own kind of vibe. But it's I'll say that I didn't make friends. I didn't fit in easily, and I think that the youth group and being plugged into something like that, you're kind of like, you have to be friends, right? like
The
so
smaller
and
it is too, like you're kind of forced to all connect.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know how many years we sat at lunch in high school. We sat, it was you and me and Jackie and Mike and everybody, and kind of that acceptance meant a lot to me, especially because I just like, I didn't hang out with people on the sports teams I was on or whatever. It wasn't cool to be in the Boy Scouts, right? Like, I was so cool in high school. I was in the Boy Scouts. I did Nordic skiing. I was one of the best chess players in Woodbury High School, guys. I mean, I was really, really
Dude,
cool.
I knew it. This just come clean.
Was that Mr. Andrews?
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. He was my cross
Shout
country
out
coach.
Mr. Andrews.
Yep.
I know you're listening.
Yeah.
Yep,
Which
shout out
is a
to Mr.
sad state of
Andrews.
affairs that I ran cross country.
Yeah, I ran cross country under Andrews as well, and he's one of my personal. I think the world of him, and hopefully I get to connect with him. But anyway, Yeah, so I mean, I think just having that small group and being able to get connected with you guys and just like being able to be accepted was something that I received from there. I didn't feel like there were a lot of prerequisites. I think that there wasn't a lot of pressure to fit in a particular mold. I mean, what I remember is you guys were kind of like into ska, and you had your like at one point you had all your little like water pistols and stuff, and I was like, okay, these guys are doing their things. I think that was maybe Bill. Maybe Bill was with it.
No, I remember the water pistols. That was a phase where we were bringing those around and pretending to, I don't know what. It was a weird phase.
Didn't you?
Some of us are still into ska. Let's be
And
real clear.
and water pistols.
I may have written a script for a show where me and two guys are going to rank the top 30 Christian ska bands. So, you know, some of us are still into it.
That would get picked up by Hulu, or was you guys?
No, it's
Fingers
my other
crossed.
podcast that no
Oh,
one
that's the
knows.
other podcast. Yeah, I think didn't Caleb, didn't you have some story? We were at one of the motel getaways where you go to the motel or the hotel or whatever, and you spend the weekend and drive the hotel staff crazy, right? With all your youth group shenanigans. Didn't you have some story where like you took the water pistol to like the airport and
I did, because I remember we used to carry them around as like a fun little thing, and I had it at the airport, and I was like, this is a bad decision. I was like, Mom, I have that water pistol in my back. I don't think I should have that here. And sure enough, I like walked up to security, and I was like, you want to take this? And they took it and threw it away. So different times, pre 9/11.
yeah, for sure.
So I find it interesting that there's so much kind of talk about the connection piece, because I think one of our other guests talked about it as well, which was, you know, just kind of accepting kids as they are and, you know, bringing them in and just letting them be themselves. With your kids being relatively the same age and that youth group being larger now, right? Do you think they're having that same experience?
I hope so. I think that ours, so they've got it split up by grade and gender. Mm-hmm. Is kind of how they do it, which I think makes sense. 8th grade girls go with 8th grade girls, right? That's where my daughter's at. I'm very grateful for the adult leaders that my daughter has had. My son's a little young. He'll start next year. But they're very empathetic. They're very caring, maybe in a way that like I struggle to be a lot of the time. I mean, I'm an engineer by trade. I may seem gregarious, but a lot of the time I'm grumpy and ornery and task oriented. And so I'm fortunate to have also married into a person that complements that very nicely. You know, my wife's really great with the kids, and she's just a lot more caring. I do the taxes. She can empathize, right?
She loves the kids. You just make sure they're comfortable.
That's more or less. I mean, I love them too in my own way. But it's something that I'm working on, certainly as a person, as a father. But it's not naturally in my wheelhouse, and I feel that they get some of that nurturing as well at youth group. She's not hanging out with kids from her youth group like we did, So there's that. So I'm doing a little bit of a compliment sandwich here, right? Like I think that they're doing an awesome job on the whole, but are they hanging out outside kind of impromptu like we
that
did?
Was their friend group, right? Like that was the friend group we had, right? And so
right, yeah.
Naturally, when you're going to do stuff on the weekends, those are the first person you were calling.
Yeah. I mean, me and Ben were hanging out every day, like all summer, like all the time. Me and Ben and Andy built a half pipe in the backyard of this house, and skated that until we hurt our tailbones so much that we couldn't skate anymore. We had to take a couple days off. And so then what we did was we took Kate's throw pillows, Ben's mom. We put Kate's throw pillows and tucked them into the back of our shorts. And so we got pictures of us skating this half pipe with these throw pillows tucked into our into our shorts so that we could protect the coccyx.
That's very important.
It is. It's one of the top things to protect.
It's also
coccyx, head in that order.
And the intended use for a throw pillow. Let's be honest. So.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
it's how to go pro, for sure. If you're gonna go pro in skating,
yeah, Tony Hawk branded throw pillows. That's
Tony Hawk's listening. Don't steal that idea. That's ours. We're gonna make money off it.
Come on the show.
Dozens of dollars on our throw pillow, on our skater throw pillows.
So we talked about like some of the community stuff, and that's been a big theme that all of our guests have talked about. How has that kind of flowed through to where you're at today, or more generally, like how does your faith now compared to where you were at that point in the 90s doing all that stuff in that small community that you had just moved into?
Yeah, I mean, I think my arc was probably fairly typical, where towards the end of high school, I became frankly a little less interested in it, and through college, I maybe wasn't the best the best disciple, right? So coming back into that, I think definitely my family has helped a lot. My wife got me really back into going to church again when we were living in Indiana. I never abandoned my faith, but I definitely had some very tough things to kind of reconcile, mm-hmm. right? A lot of just kind of the science stuff with people pushing young Earth creationism. That's not really where I'm at. And for the longest time, I was like, I'm not a young Earth creationist, right? Mm-hmm. Like I just don't think that's right. And to a certain extent, even when I started going back to church, it was like a big struggle, because it's like, are you living kind of a lie, right? Like you got this kind of hidden secret, like that you don't think that you think that the Earth is a lot older than 6,000 years, and you feel like everyone around you has to is kind of believing in this. And so one of the questions, and this is maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but there was a moment where one of the moments that really kind of reconciled was actually when we came back to Five Oaks, because I struggled with this almost in secret for years, right? Just having this kind of tension within my faith, not apart from it, but like within it, right? That and some other stuff, but this is probably the most salient example. And there was a sermon on this topic and on Genesis and things like that, and Pastor Henry kind of said, we don't take a position on that here. We think there are a number of interpretations, and as long as you're respectful when you're engaging in this conversation with people who see differently than you, that's the position, is that we don't have a position, right? And for me, that little moment really was like a reset button, like a go button for my faith. Like I said, I never left it. I always kind of had that foundation, but I was having trouble really buying in. I think I still, it's still like a struggle with things, right? But I think that's a normal thing, right? And I've always had trouble kind of capturing a lot of like enthusiasm. I'm not the most like effusive person when it comes to like, I guess, expressing myself sure. spiritually or whatever. I'm not like Mark, someone like Mark, right? Andy's dad, right? Like I'm just not. Yep. I'm just not there.
You keep it in. You're not raising your hands or jumping around. That's okay.
Yeah. I'm an upper Midwestern here, right? So.
Yeah, let's settle down.
Right.
I think that's really interesting, because that's a little bit part of my journey too, which is like I'm looking at books on my shelf right now, which are like, how do you reconcile some of these things, which seem to be pretty true. And I don't know if were there any books or authors that you read that you resonated with? Because one for me was Francis Collins, who was the head of the Genome Project, or whatever that project was called. And he's a Christian and a very, very intelligent scientist. And so it was kind of like this, basically the same issue, is that, look, this is what I hold to be true. It doesn't make or break things for me. And I think part of what we struggled with teaching, at least, or at least learning in the 90s, was if this is not true, it breaks everything else.
Yeah, and that's a common theme. Me and my wife have this this conversation a lot. Well, you're taking me as a, I'm taking liberties with an interpretation, or I'm drawing a certain. More often than not, I think it comes down to genre confusion, right? Like I perceive a particular part of the Bible as a particular genre, whether it's historicized legend, or a parody, or a wisdom text, right? Like I think that Job is a great example of this, right? The book of Job, and I might get in trouble. Maybe they'll kick me out of the church for saying
All
this.
right, let's go. That's why I started the podcast. No, just kidding.
Got him.
Can't get away now.
I'll preface this by saying that I don't think that believing in a historical Job is a prerequisite for Christian faith. I tend to believe that if there is a historical Job, he's probably a composite of a number of different characters. And that believing that or choosing to have faith that is a true, like, historically accurate story, and this is just one example of several others that I can think of, it obscures and kind of glosses over some of the rich context that you can glean from that, right? If you're reading Job as a historical account, I think that you miss out on a certain amount of, setting up his friends as foils for the philosophical debate that's occurring within the book.
Excellent,
And so like that's how I tend to approach it. You ask if I have books or whatever that influenced me. The Reason for God by Tim Keller, I think, is a great book. I recommend that to everybody. And that was again a book that I read kind of at this inflection point when I'd moved back up here, that really kind of catalyzed things.
Caleb and I had a discussion about like the phase of evangelicalism that was so steeped in apologetics, and there was just a mass market for it for a while, because there was really a time, and it was basically around, like, particularly I think because I think we had left. It kind of started when I left and went to college. Was just like, hey, we have to really defend these central tenets. And look, I'm not saying like, oh, Jesus did or did not exist. It doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. It's just like some of these things, like you said, weren't necessarily meant to be historical documentation of what actually happened. They were supposed to tell a story. And if we can we were never really taught in the 90s how to engage with the story. It was more like, why is this true?
Yeah, and I think that defending every aspect of that is something that is it's very difficult to do, right? And I think that clarifying the genre of what you're talking about, and you got to be able to defend that as well, right? You have to be able to defend. Like, I have to be able to defend my belief that Job is a wisdom book and not a history text, right? Like, I have to be able to defend that. And when I make a statement like that, the onus is on me to do that, and I have to accept, respectfully being challenged on that. Like, I'm okay with that, right? So, I think that there's certainly a lot of strategy that goes into that, but I just think that trying to defend every sentence of every piece of this is very, 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 very difficult. And I think if you are in a ministry field, it is not a helpful way to try to reach somebody. It's more helpful to try to say, look, what does Job tell us about God? What does it tell us about the human condition? Instead of spending your time debating its historicity, right? Yep. I mean, you can spend that time having like a legit conversation about how it connects with other pieces.
Yep. No, I think that's I'm with you on some of that stuff, and I know for others it can be harder, right? Because again, all these tenets, it's sometimes people feel, and I felt this way for a long time, is that if this changes, oh no, what else is going to change?
It negates everything.
And
Yeah,
is
yeah,
this a
right. Yep.
slippery slope to eventually I don't believe in Jesus anymore? And I can understand why people are afraid of that, but at some point it's actually, for at least for me and other people I've chatted with, it's deepening of it, right? And it goes back to my favorite quote on this topic, which is by Richard Rohr. Myth is always true, and sometimes it actually happened. And that when I heard that, it was just
Yeah.
like a light bulb for me. It's like, yeah, it's true, but it doesn't mean that it was actually like as it was stated. But I can understand, especially being a product of that culture at that time. Again, Lee Strobel books, all that stuff. Like, if it's not true, what else is not true? And we can get afraid of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a dangerous tack to sail,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I don't think it's all that useful in the end, right? I mean, I just don't like. What's the utility of debating whether Noah lived to be 900 years
Mm-hmm.
old? I don't see that as a foundational faith element. So I just like choose to
Yeah, put it down at a different level, different shelf. Yep.
right, right.
Well, those are some things that have changed for you a little bit. What are some things that have stayed the same compared to where your faith was at in the 90s?
Um, I think foundationally, things are pretty solid. You know, as far as belief in Jesus, belief in the resurrection and atonement for sins and so forth. I mean, I think that the base fundamentals. It's hard to say what's stayed the same because yeah, I mean, I think having a foundation for all that stuff is one thing, and um, yeah, I mean, I guess I have trouble engaging in the same way that I did back then. Like it's just a different phase of life, so you're gonna engage differently with it. So I'm not gonna say that everything's changed, but like it's maybe a bit more partitioned once you start working. I travel a lot for my work, and you know, I'm involved in some other things around, and that's one thing. I don't know. I don't really do New Year's resolutions, but one thing I was like, well, maybe I'll try to work on this year is kind of departitioning some of those features. So, and I mean, this exercise here is maybe one of those activities.
Look, at the end of the day, especially for Caleb and I, this is like free therapy. So if this was cathartic and you want to come back on and let's fine with us. It's fine
Hey,
with us.
I'll talk to you guys whenever you want.
We're here every week.
Yeah.
That's what we do. I got nothing else to do.
I didn't tell my wife, but this is going to be my full-time job soon. So please, I need more content. Looking back then on, how that was the same, was there part of the youth group experience at all that you kind of like struggle with looking back? Like hindsight is always 20/20, and of course it's not fair to judge that moment now, but is there some things that you kind of look back and are like, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or I kind of struggle with some of that?
I think are you talking more about how things were run within the youth group administratively, or are you talking? I mean, you're not talking about like some personal behavior. I got plenty of regrets there, right?
Not.
But
if you would like, again, free therapy. If you need to confess, just go ahead. No, not any of the personal choices or anything per se. Just like the experience as a whole. I
mean, one thing in the kind of lead up to this is I think that at one point we were. John or whomever, and maybe this is the right decision, maybe it's not, but there was this concept that you would take a select few youth and make a higher level of discipleship team, and there was an application and interview process. Again, it's hard to second guess something after the fact, but I even at the time I was like, this is this idea of kind of splitting the youth group into two levels did not seem to me to be a very good thing to do. And the reason I say that is, I had a friend of mine attended youth group the same amount of times that I did. I got onto this team through the application interview process, and he didn't, right? Like how does that make that guy feel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not designed to take everybody, but like I feel like that activity damaged his faith, and was I understand the aim of it was to create a more focused community group among the kids that were really maybe at a higher dedication level than everybody else, but at the same time saying, you guys are on the A team, and everybody else is on the B and C team. I think in a youth group context that's not wise.
Sure. Sure.
No.
That's interesting. I never even thought of that, because I think at some point we were probably all on that leadership team, whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And added responsibility and that sort of thing too.
Yeah.
But I never thought about like, oh yeah, hey, that does exclude other people, and they're not, we're kids. It's not like an adult be like, oh, I didn't get that job, I got to work harder. Like, yeah, you're going to be affected by that.
Yeah. Now, I want to be very, very clear that I think that one of the purposes for youth group is developing disciples and leaders within that context. I mean, one great thing that they do at Five Oaks right now, which they have live music. They'll have a band play like on Wednesday nights for their worship time, and the idea is that you're going to have the youth play the instruments, sing, and so forth. Right. Part of that is mentoring those kids to play together as a band, to learn to follow the click track, to learn how to play their instrument with a group, to get used to some of the stage presence coaching, right? Like, you could look at it through the lens that I just used for this kind of bifurcation of these two teams and say, well, it's doing the same thing. But I don't necessarily think so, because you're training certain technical skills, you're training certain competencies there, and I think that coaching and teaching people some leadership skills, and I use music as an example just because it's so obviously has a technical component to it, and there's as much as people maybe don't want to admit it, there's a performative aspect to it, right? You want to be engaged in what you're doing, but there's a good and useful purpose for doing that. You're going to bring these kids up. They're going to then go into college and be on worship teams, and it can take a lot of learning curve to get through and be competent. I mean, it took me years to learn to follow a click track. I was terrible at it for the longest time, right? You got to get the reps in, and when you're young, it's good to do that. So I just want to be clear that I think that there's a place for identifying kids who are ready to lead or have spiritual gifts or have particular skills like playing music or singing or whatever, and cultivating that and coaching that. But I think that taking the youth group and splitting it in two is not with an application process, right, is not the right way to do that.
It feels like that's actually something that could have been more easily done when the youth group was smaller, and with it being as large as it is now, or some churches have very, very large youth groups. It may not make quite sense. Like, what was the utility of that to separate out 8 kids amongst 100? But what I hear you saying is, like, kids can have roles of leadership and development within their group context. They don't necessarily need to be pulled aside, and for me at least, like, I was, like we mentioned, I was a junior high youth group leader for at least a couple years, and so that was part of that development, was like, hey, sorry, John, here, go do my job. Like, obviously this wasn't the intention, but it was it was development, right? And so they were trying to make that development, but I it sounds like what you're saying is like, hey, you don't necessarily have to like pull kids out and make them more of a Christian than others to do that.
Yeah, I think that my take on it is on just leadership and development is you got to meet people where they're at, right? People are going to be on a spectrum from non-believing to like super Christian, right? I'll be just very honest. I'm not on either side of that that spectrum, right? But I think that there's something dangerous in drawing a line on that spectrum and saying, this is where you're good enough for the next step or whatever, right?
Yeah, especially when we're coming up in a culture where it's like, hey, you gotta, obviously to follow Jesus, we want to be avoiding all these different pitfalls and stuff. And if you don't make it, it's like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, I'm trying my best.
Yeah,
I can see how that would bring someone down.
That's the one thing that I really, as I was kind of thinking about that in preparation, I was like, yeah, that's just kind of, that situation rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it's just because I had a buddy of mine that like didn't make the cut, right?
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden you can't hang out anymore or something.
Is that the right context to like not make the cut? It's not a football team, right?
Well, it was at times.
yeah. Well, if you ask Mike, it was, I suppose.
I was in a few locker rooms. It felt the same. No, just
That's I've never thought about it from the perspective of somebody who wasn't on it, and I've never had, because all of my friends were on it at the time. I mean, I had friends who weren't, but like my closest friends were all on it, so I never thought about that in that context. That's really interesting. I'm like, there's all these thoughts going off in my head now of like, oh, what else have I not thought about that? I'm looking at it in an entirely positive, where if you'd put somebody just right outside of it, there could be a different reaction. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and some of that's maybe my perspective of coming at it from like being an outsider in a lot of social contexts throughout most of my life, right? I mean, I've been there where you're not invited to the thing, or you're not making the list, I
feel for the little guy.
Yeah, I guess.
Wrong phrase, I guess, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I mean that's just, I mean, like I've said before, I think it's an overwhelmingly positive experience that we had. I think that being a youth pastor is an extremely difficult job. And John, if you're listening, just know that I've always believed that, even though I've caused you a lot of trouble in the past. But yeah, I think it takes, you've got to have discernment on something like forming this discipleship team or whatever, right? You have to be identifying where people are at, not only like spiritually, which is ostensibly what you're trained in, but also emotionally, developmentally. Like you've got to be a friend and a confidant, but also someone with some authority, right? It's a very, very difficult thing.
You have to know when to play each of those cards at the right time.
Yeah, and nobody's going to get it right every time, right? So like, I lead a lot of teams at work. I deal with a lot of different contexts, and I don't get it right a lot of the time. I don't get it right as a parent a lot of the time. Like, being a youth pastor is even harder than all those things.
What I'm curious, in that maybe coming out of that context of being selected for a group like that, but what's something your youth group self would tell your adult self now, and like vice versa? Like what is some advice you would tell your young self, and if you look back, you're like, man, if I knew myself at 41, my 18-year-old self would be pissed. Or it's like what are some advice you would exchange between the two eras?
So I actually had to bring up my little notebook here, because I actually wrote a little bit down. I did.
Amazing.
Don't get too excited. It's this much, right? So
for those of you who can't see, which is no one, it's 2 sentences, but that's fine.
I'm gonna write something down, so I feel like I've prepared now.
No, because I didn't want to forget, because it's hard to think about this question. I would tell 18-year-old me not to don't underestimate your influence, and don't take it for granted. And I think that comes from maybe, I mean, when you're in high school, you're trying to be cool, trying to fit in, whatever. It can be easy to behave in ways that, or say things to get a rise out of people, or say, not be kind to folks, or tell a story that's maybe a little off color or in poor taste, right? And in doing so, like, I think what I've realized as I've gotten older is that there aren't a lot of instances. I don't regret a whole lot in my life. I'll just be straight about that. But I've really, there have been times when I've hurt people and I haven't really intended to. I think that comes from kind of underestimating the influence and the gravitas that maybe I carried that I didn't recognize at the time. When you're trying to fit in, you're trying to impress people or whatever. A lot of the time, you're thinking of yourself as the one that needs to be accepted. You go into, and you got this older cohort like you guys are in. Well, these guys think I'm cool. What can I say or do that's gonna help me fit in? And what gets lost a lot of the time, I think, is you can contort yourself in a way that is damaging to somebody else who's watching, right? And fortunately, I don't think I messed too many people up like that. I think my sisters wound up pretty well adjusted.
Well, we're talking to them tomorrow, so we'll tell you.
Oh, are you? I actually, I mean, you should talk to them. Actually,
we'd love to.
That'd be a. Did you guys have Bethany on the podcast? Just parenthetically.
My sister?
Yeah.
Not yet. She wants to be on it.
Okay.
Just gotta find the good time. She absolutely is interested. So yeah.
I saw her a couple of years ago, but it's been a little bit.
What would your adult self tell to your 18-year-old self?
So I didn't have a sentence written for that one.
Well, we'll skip it then.
There's a lot of kind of idealism. I remember when Ben went to college. He was my best friend in high school, and that was a big kind of turning point for me. I was kind of he was a year ahead of me, and kind of losing him to the next phase of life was a difficult transition. And I think he saved the letter that I wrote for him, and it's all very like idealistic, Horatio Alger stuff, but just like just keep the faith, keep that youthful enthusiasm.
Keep the pillow on your coccyx.
Yeah, that's true.
That was in there too.
Yeah, that was in there actually. It was written on the back, postscript. But yeah, I don't have anything I would tell. It's not a total just like something that's totally cliche,
right?
Quotidian, like
sure.
Something else that I had from my younger self, if I can go back
Please.
to that, is don't waste your wasting time.
Explain.
Like there's time to be wasted, right? And you shouldn't waste that time doing something. You guys can take that for what it is, but I feel like there's the perspective that I've gained getting older is just that I wish I'd taken a little more time, maybe around the edges, of what I was doing, whether it's studying or working or whatever else, to kind of be. Again, it's not a regret. I don't have regrets over that, but I think now, with as busy as you are in your 30s and 40s, I think you really see the value of wasting time. And I'll tell this story real quick. I think you'll appreciate it, Scott. I took my brother-in-law up to the Boundary Waters for a couple nights, 1 or 2 years ago here. We got into camp, we set up, so we canoed out. We were way up in the wilderness in northern Minnesota, and we got everything set up, and we had a couple hours before dinner and all this kind of stuff. And he was kind of he's kind of pacing around, kind of like agitated, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on, man? What's up?" He's like, "Well, I just feel like we should be doing something. Like there's there's an activity that we need to be preparing something. We need to be this." And I said, this is a rare moment of wisdom that I had. I was like, Brooks, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to do. You got your choice. You can stare at the water, or you can take a nap or whatever. Like, this time does not have an occupier. And so that's what I mean by not wasting your wasting time. Like, you should
Yeah.
take that time to be. I have a really hard time doing that now,
That's
by
good
the way.
advice.
So that's probably why.
That's why I love the Boundary Waters. And even as many times I've gone, the first night is always like, all right, let's go. And by the second night, you're like, whatever. Just like, who cares? It's fine. You got a tent. Just cook some food. You're good.
Yep.
That's why that
Yep.
place.
But there's nothing to do. Just have there be nothing to do. That's an acceptable state. And I have a hard time saying that's okay. I'm a very like high strung, like goal oriented, task oriented person, and it's not easy to do.
It's difficult. How do you think, just overall, in general, how do you think your youth group experience in the 90s contributes to who you are right now?
Yeah, it's a tough question because it's hard to view that in a vacuum, I think. I think I've gained a lot of perspective maybe through looking back at maybe some situations that I didn't handle right, or maybe there's some examples of how I was mentored by John and Henry. I have great respect for Henry. And that's no secret.
Head pastor of the church is still there.
Head pastor Henry. Yep. And I really appreciate his influence and his wisdom. There were a couple times when he really took the time to, kind of come down and meet me where I was at. And I think that's really positive. And I think that folks don't realize what even small actions, they have these ripple effects that go out for better and worse, right? I mean, I remember when I went to a plant. I mean, I'm so grateful for this. I went to one of the plants that I support. I put in process equipment for a large, diversified Minnesota-based manufacturing company.
Sounds legit.
And when I got there, I was new on the job, right? So it's one of these social situations that I'm talking about, where you're the new guy. You're not familiar with the people. You don't know your way around where you're going. And when I got there, they had a hard hat with my name printed out with a little label on it. And it cost them all like 2 minutes and 50 cents to do this thing, but that meant so much to me. And when someone like Henry or John or one of the other adult leaders really kind of takes that time to just make even a small correction, a small word of encouragement, that its effect is amplified. It really is. And I think that one of the things that I've come to notice when in my job now, so my dad worked for the company I work for now, and he retired, and then I took a job because I didn't want to necessarily follow in my dad's footsteps and get a job because you're this guy's kid or whatever, right? I kind of like to make my own path. But people that found out, oh your dad's such and such, right? A lot of the stories that I got had to do with this great interpersonal warmth that he extended to them. Taking the time on a flight to go and sit and talk talk to everybody, or going down into the basement where the purchasing people are and talk to them. And I mean, he was at a high level in the organization. And I think that when you're growing up and your dad's someone who's like an authority figure, right? You don't necessarily see them have that interpersonal warmth. You see them as an authority figure. Now that I'm an adult, he's more like a friend, right? And I think the same thing applies to certain moments that we had in youth group, right? Which is just having those small moments to kind of coach and mentor and come down and meet you where you're at.
It's almost like let's just continue to have that ethos, that the way of operating that way, because you never know how it's going to hit. Some kids at some point it may, or some people it may just roll off their back. But other people, they may need to hear just those simple words or that simple engagement, and that can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were a handful of specific moments that they're just for me that I can think of where I just felt really seen and encouraged. Whether that contributes to who you are, it's hard to separate. You got between church and youth group and family, and I was in scouts, and I count scouts for imparting a lot of the values and a lot of the skills that I took into my adulthood. It's hard to part that out, but I think that's a very positive thing I think. I mean, you can have bad things too, but I think it's a very positive thing to say about somebody, and it's a great compliment, or it's intended to be a great compliment to those guys that have taken the time to do that for me.
They invested.
Right? It's important.
They really did.
Right.
Well, Brant, we really appreciate the being candid about all this. It's a lot of it does resonate. The connection, the investment, the belief these adults had, and most of us, not everyone has that feeling of them being believed in, but I agree with you that they were very intentional about operating that way. So my last question here, because we've taken up plenty of your time this evening, is one I like to conclude with everybody is, it was not on the list, so off the top of your head,
Ooh.
What was the zaniest, craziest / borderline illegal, or just literally illegal youth group game thing, that event that happened while you were a youth there?
Oh boy. Has anybody talked about the fire?
Me and Scott touched on it.
It was Bill.
Me and Bill, when we talked to Bill. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But no, that's a good one, because I think you were more involved than any of us.
Well, that was one of Tom Moore's favorite stories, because now I live next to Tom, of course. Or, I used to live next to Tom. They've since moved away, and Tom's passed on. Yeah. But that was his favorite story. So, and there's a little postscript to that one that I don't think that a lot of people know.
Please do tell.
So I'll tell the story. So this would have been. Were you guys out there for that, Scott? Were you there for this?
I don't honestly.
Mike,
I don't remember.
I know Mike was
but
there.
I probably was. Maybe I've just selectively erased it.
So I know Jackie was there, and Bonnie and Ben and Mike and a bunch of folks. I think Bill must have been there. So when it came time to clear the barn off of the farm land that now houses Five Oaks Church, there were a few buildings, right? There was the house that had where we would meet for youth group and the offices upstairs, and then there was a barn that got torn down and was in a pile that must have been 30 feet in diameter, a barn in diameter, and then heaped up, I don't know, 15, one barn's diameter, please.
The traditional horticultural measurement.
Yeah, it was many cubits tall. It was definitely 8 or 10 feet tall at least. And so it was going to cost the church a lot of money to haul away this barn that had been torn down. And so what they decided to do was say, well, Brant likes to, he's good at building fires and burning things. He seems to enjoy
he's
that
a Boy
sort of
Scout.
thing. And he's a Boy Scout. Let's get him a burning permit, and then he can legally burn this
They
barn.
got you the permit.
They got a permit, and then they had the youth group go out there, and with me in mind was my understanding. They said, Brant, go and burn this barn. So I went out there, and I don't know, Mike was trying to light it up with a bunch of gasoline and all this stuff, and it was kind of going, and we finally got it going. I started it small, and then it was a hot day. It was July or August. This would have been 1999, I think.
Yeah.
And before you know it, this thing is a full-blown just blaze. The flames are shooting up. You could not get within 30 feet of this thing without singeing your eyebrows off. It was so hot. I had taken a garden hose and wet down the foliage around it so that we wouldn't catch the rest of the farm on fire and all this kind of stuff, which the fire department complimented me on, by the way. And so, I mean, the day after, we're getting calls from people who were at the intersection a mile and a half away who could see the smoke and the flames from this thing just erupting out of the farm. And so word gets around town or whatever that this fire's going on, and the fire department shows up. And so they come out there, and they're kind of like, I'd say they took an academic interest in what we were doing. They thought that we had it very well controlled, so they complimented us on that, as I mentioned. And then they said, well, we're going to have to put this out. And so it took them 5 of those 15 or 20,000 gallon tanker trucks to put this fire out. people were driving past at 2 in the morning, and they were still raking through the coals, making sure it was out. Like it actually took a lot of effort to put this fire out. So the next day, it's gone. It's just a slightly steamy, smoldery wreckage, and so okay, well that was a thing that happened. Everybody went about their lives. So the postscript that doesn't get talked about a lot, because I think this is just something that happened to me. John calls me up to his office. It was a weekday afternoon or something. He calls me up to his office. He's like, "Hey, yeah, we need to talk about something." And so he calls me up. He's like, sit down. I sit down across the desk from him, and he says, "Brant, the fire that we had." And I was like, "Yeah, John, I remember that. It was not that long ago."
It was awesome.
Yes, I remember that. It was super cool. Yes, I remember that. He's like, "Well, the city is your burning permit was only for a 6-foot diameter fire, and as you may know, we slightly exceeded that parameter." And I was like, "Yeah, that checks out. Yeah, we did exceed the
barn length
6 foot.
6
Yes,
feet. Yeah.
yeah. One barn
Circumference.
diameter is larger than 6 feet. Yeah, so he's like, well, yeah, there's a consequence for that. The church is getting fined for exceeding their building permit." And I was like, oh man, because I'm like 5 water trucks, like all these fire guys are out there, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know what it costs to put out a barn fire. And John kind of like, he's deadpanning this whole thing, and he's pausing, and he's like, "Yeah, they're fining us $75." And then he gave me a high five. It was like, "Nice going."
Oh man, I see. If it was 99, I was in college, so I was gone by that point. Which is probably why I don't remember. But the lore is etched in Five Oaks history now.
It's a famous one. There are many around to tell the tale.
Well, I hope he made you pay that $75.
I think that was the threat. I don't think I did though. He should have.
To work it off.
I don't think I had 70. Yeah, I don't think I had $75 working at Broadway Pizza.
The volunteer at Junior High Youth Group. This punishment.
All right.
Well, hey, we really appreciate this very much. It's great to reconnect. Great to talk to you. If anything, I don't really care if anyone listens to this stuff. It's just really fun to talk with people that we knew, in that capacity, because it meant a lot. It meant a lot to everybody. So we appreciate you opening up and talking about your experience.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, can I ask you guys a question?
Nope, we're done. Sorry. See ya.
Oh,
Click. No. Yeah, please.
I guess why are you doing this? What are your motivations? What do you hope people get out of this?
Well, money. I'm going to start a podcast empire. So, no, you're right.
Dozens of dollars rolling in.
Dozens.
A nickel at a time.
My son will be able to afford community college in 20 years. No, nothing against community college at all. But I don't know, Caleb. We talked about this idea a year or two ago, and I know that personally I have changed quite a bit, similar to some of the stuff you talked about with just like, how do you deal with some of what the Bible says and taking it inerrantly / seriously? I did go to seminary, and I mentioned this on different podcasts, but like, I've changed my tune on some stances on things, whether that's politically or ethically, and my rather conservative family was like, "Oh, you went to a liberal art school." No, it's because I went to Bethel Seminary. And so it was like kind of that time of kind of that teaching, opening up and being like, hey, let's think bigger about these things. And that was just my experience. And then getting married, starting a family, job, all that kind of stuff. It's like, man, this for me and for Caleb too, I think like that experience just stays with you. It's still meaningful. Even though I view it, maybe differently than some, it's still meaningful, and it's still really molded who I am today. And so I'm like, what's going on with other people? Like I remember you and Ben, skateboarding and all that story. You guys were crazy and you had a lot of fun together, and that was great. Are you guys like, who knows where you guys are at now? Other people that we're very close with, or we're very, very close with, that we haven't talked to in years, where are they at? How has life affected them? And because the whole youth group experience seemed to be pretty seminal to many, many, many people, not just the ones we know, but the people that, at least I know here in the Midwest, it's like, what are some commonalities? What do we share? What are some stories we can share with each other?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I definitely understand. The conflation of politics with religion. Especially just kind of one party trying to kind of own the evangelical movement in particular. Right? Is a very harmful thing in my mind.
It's hard.
And certainly, I think as I've matured in my faith, I've become far more liberal.
And politics is like one example, right? And maybe that's
Right.
maybe that's another conversation we have at a different time. But like,
Yeah, that is another podcast, isn't it? Invite me back for that one. I'll give you some
please.
thoughts. I'll be verbose. Yeah, I'm nothing if not verbose.
But yeah, that's just like one example, right? Like and Caleb, correct me if I'm wrong, but that message that always resonated with me that John would always tell us: I don't care where you're at now, I care where you're at in 10 years. Well, now it's 25 years later, right? Are we what he had hoped? Not that it matters to me what he thinks, but like, is that what happened, kind of what we had hoped would happen? No, it's not. Well, why? Because at 16, 17, 18, at least for me, being the oldest and type A and, very confident, like I was convinced I would be that way the rest of my life. And it's not the case.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What about you, Caleb? What were your thoughts on like why you're doing this? Why is it important?
So it was Scott's idea. I was just along for the ride. And so he said it and I was like, oh, I really like that. And there's two things that really made it blossom for me to the point where I was like, I learned how to do podcasting so I could convince Scott to do this.
That's
So
true.
I do my own show just for fun. Like nobody listens to it, but I was like, Scott, I can do this now. I can help you actually do this. So there are two things for me. One is I have 3 kids in youth group, and in a couple of years I'll have 4. So I'll have 4 kids in youth group all at the same time. And we go to a church that I like. Finally, it's been a journey. The last 10 years has been a rough journey of church engagement for our family. But it's such a foreign experience to me compared to our youth group experience. It's the band that you talked about, and it just feels, I'm going to use this word and I'm not trying to rag on my kids' youth group, but it's sterile compared to what we did.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is about our experience. It's so unique. And I just felt like it'd be really interesting to see, even though I have some hangups about that experience, I know how much it still is connected to me. Even if it hasn't influenced me, it's there. I thought it'd be interesting to hear where people are at. I thought it'd also be really interesting to hear. Somebody hopefully we get on the show is Mike, and
I'll talk to him. I'll bug him
Jackie
about
has
it.
too. But like he's still at the church and has never left. And so you're going to have people who are there, who are at the church, that they were there and they're never going to leave. And there's people who've left the faith. And I want that idea of, I want to hear both sides of that story. And maybe it'll help us all just take a step back and listen to somebody else, their experience, why they're still at the church or why they've left the faith entirely. Those are both interesting things that I kind of want I want people to be able to come in and just say, how they got there. And both are really interesting to me, and just share. We're not going to argue with you either way. I just want to hear it and just kind of hear how it happened. And that seemed really, really interesting to me.
Can we do another one where we argue?
Yes, we need this conflict.
We
It
should have
drives
an
ratings.
argument podcast. It does drive ratings, yeah.
I am I am not smart enough to argue with
Wait,
either of you. So go have fun.
Let's
way
pick
out.
a
I'm
topic
outmatched.
that you care about, like comic books. See? Yeah.
Sure, we can do that.
I'm just gonna make stuff up.
That'll.
Yeah, Mike would be
cares about comic.
Mike would be a great guest, by the way, and he's got a great family. I play with his son is a really good guitar player. Been playing with him on worship team, on like Sunday worship team, and yeah, I mean he's got a great family. He'd be a good guy to have on. I hope he
And even you said right there, like his kids. So we're like third generation, right? Staying there, and why? So
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks again. We really, really appreciate this.
Thanks, friends.
Yes.
Thanks for letting me flip the script and ask you guys a question.
I was not prepared. But, no.
You should be prepared. Spanish Inquisition. No one expects it.
The real answer is my 10-year-old really likes listening to the one trailer we put out so far. So I just need to get content for him so he can go to sleep. That's really why I did
Your voice puts your kid to sleep.
Safe content that he can go to sleep to.
Nice. Well, I do it again with you guys. This is a lot of fun. It's great catching up. I appreciate you listening to me rant here a little bit. Hopefully it's not too rambly. You can edit.
We'll edit this to like
actually say
3 minutes. So that'll be fine.
There you go.
No, thanks
There
very
you
much.
go.
We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to thank Brant for joining us. It was great to chat with him and just sit down and talk and hear about where he's been and kind of his journey into post-youth group life. And it's great to hear about another person who is kind of still at the church that we all went to youth group at, although with a couple other stops in between. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can also email us at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, let us know. You didn't necessarily have to attend the youth group we did. Eventually, we do want to start kind of expanding this out and hearing about different people's experience from other youth groups from the 90s and even the 2000s. So again, feel free to email us or find us on Twitter. We'd love to connect. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to sit down and talk about some of the music I've documented on my calendar. Once again, that is the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank God he came back. All right.
Do I need to
He's the first guest to come back for the second Zoom. Nice.
Do I need to do anything with the Zoom on this to
No,
do
no, it should
anything
be
with
fine.
the mics or anything?
No,
Cool.
should be good.
Far out.
All right. Well, Caleb, count me in and we can kind of jump right back into it.
Sounds good. Just for the record, everybody we've talked to, outside of me, has in some capacity left and come back and done something at
That's
Five
true.
Oaks. Every single person.
Really?
I'm the only one who didn't come back and work or attend in some way so far. I'm sure we'll get to some people who haven't, but to this point, so it's pretty amazing.
I mean, I haven't
Yeah.
either. But I think I volunteered in college a little bit.
You interned there,
Okay.
dude.
Well, I didn't work there.
I saw you give a
I
sermon.
know, but I didn't work there.
I saw you give a sermon at the church.
All right, fine.
Anyway,
Participated.
all right, here we go. You participated. All right, 3, 2, 1.